Niall Paterson here with the Sky News Daily. Great to have you with us. I am currently sat in our Westminster studio. Why, you might ask, am I in this windowless room staring at the telly? There's one big reason, and it's because we're about to get at the latest round in the Tory leadership contest. Yesterday, the numbers were reduced from 4 to 3. Tom Tugendhat only gaining the support of 20 of his colleagues in Parliament. That wasn't enough. He is out. Today, we're about to find out who the final two will be. I'm joined in this studio by our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh, our producer, Soila, sitting over in the corner, making sure that everything works fine. It does look like we are about to get a result, so let's have a listen.
So 120 MPs voted, and I can report the numbers of votes for each candidate as follows. Kemi Badenoch, 42 votes.
Bloody hell!
James Cleverly, 37 votes.
Wow.
And Robert Jenrick, 41 votes.
You got the detail?
Yeah.
I didn't see that one coming. I did not see that one. I literally didn't see that one coming. Well, just to recap those results once again, Kemi Badenoch out in front on 42. That represents 12 more MPs than she had this time yesterday. Robert Jenrick, second place and through to the final ballot with Kemi Badenoch. He is on 41. James Cleverly had the support of 37 MPs, which is in fact 2 less than he had yesterday. Look, we were just saying just before we hit record there, what do you think's going to happen, Neil? I think James Cleverly's going to win it with the membership. Shows what I know.
Oh, yes. I mean, this is a turnaround from a judo flip that already happened post-conference. So, yes, this is a huge surprise. I think that's because we thought Cleverly had this momentum.
It really was one of those moments in the Conservative Party conference where you popped your head out of the Sky News media suite, you spoke to a couple of people, and Cleverly won the day. Completely anecdotally, but clearly not the contest.
The numbers showed it in the last round, right? He came up top with 39. Now he's got 37 and he's out. So this is much more of a rollercoaster, I think, than people expected.
What do we think then has happened here? For James Cleverly to have dropped a couple suggests that, the support that was there for him was not as strong as it appeared, let's not forget, this time yesterday.
So essentially what you've got Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, who are appealing to the right wing of the party, and they're very obvious in that. Tom Tugendhat and Cleverly were sort of pitching themselves as the counterpoint to that. So what you saw yesterday was Tom Tugendhat is out. People assumed that if you're voting for Tom Tugendhat, you probably would slowly move to Cleverly. Because
he is the more centrist of the remaining candidates.
Exactly. But maybe the thinking now from these numbers is that if Cleverly is right at the top and he's seeing as a front runner and having all this momentum, perhaps those people who want the Conservatives to move to the right are much more motivated. Perhaps that has really pushed them out today. But I should also say, 2 people in the Tory party have just texted saying, one has said that is so funny, and another has just said ha 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 ha. I think
an end to the Tory infighting is clearly not just around the corner then. But look, something that I have been detecting, and there's been an awful lot of chat in the past 24, 48 hours about those 20 MPs that Tom Tugendhat had. And as you say, there was an assumption that a chunk of them would flow the direction of James Cleverly. That doesn't appear to have happened. The other thing that people have been saying to me is just keep an eye on Cleverly's numbers. We still think he's going to go through, but he may well choose to give some of his support to Robert Jenrick because for 2 reasons. One, they want a candidate from the centre and a candidate on the right on the ballot for the members to have a look at. And secondly, because James Cleverly thought that he could beat Kemi Badenoch rather more than he could Robert Jenrick.
I think what this result does is essentially take off any sort of choice really for the membership, for the direction of the party to go. They've essentially got 2 right-wing candidates pushing their pitches to take on reform. So essentially the membership now have only got to choose between a much closer choice than they had before.
Just one second, I'm just doing the numbers here. So again, we have 120 MPs have cast their votes. Now yesterday we were told that Rishi Sunak was remaining above the fray, and one presumes that remains the case. So that means that the chairman of the 1922 of the kind of the parliamentary group of Conservative MPs has himself expressed a preference. And I suppose my point is, A, that I'm quite surprised by that, but B, is that what they're supposed to do in situations like this when you occupy such a position?
It's always been the case that they can have a say. They are in the parliamentary party. I mean, it's up to them if they want to have this extra layer of impartiality, I guess, but that would be always self-imposed. I mean, when you have to cast a no confidence vote in the Prime Minister, if it ever came to that, or in the leader, you would essentially have to submit it to yourself. But that's always been kind of a farcical point of the party. Interestingly, Tom Tugendhat, there was rumours that he wouldn't vote and he would stay above it. Perhaps he has not.
These are details that will no doubt emerge, and as listeners can probably hear, your phone continues to vibrate.
Yes, sorry, another one says madness, utter madness.
The people that are talking to you, those that were suggesting a sense of triumph in James Cleverly not going through, which wings of the party are they coming from? Because I mean, I'm looking at the numbers again on the big screen behind you. Badenoch 42, Cleverly 37, Jenrick 41. Is the One Nation coterie of Conservative MPs, is that just done now? Because we have two of the right candidates, one of whom will definitely be the next Conservative leader. Well,
there was a sense after this massive loss for the Conservatives that the parliamentary party, at least, would move towards the One Nation side just because of where the Tories lost seats. So they lost it hugely in the Red Wall. There's no Northern Research Group MPs grouping in the same way. They were always, the Boris backers, seen as quite right-wing. And you sort of had these southern Tory heartlands still, although the Lib Dems did very well there. And so you actually would have assumed they would be the strongest contingent in the party at the moment. I think two things. There are newer MPs that have been elected, a small amount, but there are still newer MPs. And also, there's just sort of chaos in the party. So even if there are the majority of One Nation sympathisers, I guess you could say, they haven't really organised, they haven't really decided. And there's a third thing, which is the Tories have always been slightly less ideological than the Labour Party. They would themselves admit they smell power, they vote for power, and some of this voting could be not just about who they politically align with, but who they think is going to get them into power, can unite the party, and perhaps they see the Tories moving in the direction of the right anyway, and they want a strong candidate to do that.
I can sort of, if I squint, see the logic in this, and it comes in the shape of Nigel Farage and Reform and the millions of votes that they got that, let's not forget, because of the vicissitudes of our parliamentary system, only ended up getting them a handful of MPs. But at the same time, I covered that general election as well, and I remember the Liberal Democrats doing incredibly well and taking seats left, right and centre from the Conservatives, which is why they're now at the highest that they've ever been in terms of parliamentary representation. And the only one of the four candidates, until yesterday, four candidates, that actually flagged up, we need to be thinking about taking seats back from the Libs, was Tom Tugendhat.
Again, speaking of this thing of the Tories can sense power, they see where the momentum is going. They see where the power shifts are going. And I think there is a sense in the Conservative Party that the only move is to the right. And they are speaking the loudest. They're making the biggest noise. The membership is also very supportive of Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick. They poll quite highly. And if they've just had their conference, they're in this echo chamber of membership voters and thinking about what their members want. I think the people who are loudest are saying reform is the biggest threat right now, and that's quite a compelling argument within the Tory party.
I have to say that given the final two that are going to be taking their pitch to the members, I think the chances of Nigel Farage coming back into the Conservative Party, I think they've been reduced. I don't know whether you'd agree with that.
Nigel Farage, throughout the general election, said he didn't want to be part of the Tory party. He didn't want to be back in the Tory party.
He also said he didn't want to stand and he was off to the United States. He says
this
a lot
is true.
of things,
We have
Nigel.
to take things with a pinch of salt. That is correct. I think there's actually a groundswell of support for reform at the moment, that it's not that appealing for Nigel Farage to defect to the Conservatives in the way it used to be quite appealing. Also, another Conservative who worked on one of the campaign teams, I won't say which, but said there's no point trying to become Farage, because in their words, they said Farage does it better than we can. Farage will eat us alive. So actually competing with him, as you say, doesn't yield any results. I think, though, the membership are crying out for the Conservative Party to lurch to the right. Badenoch is seen as a rising star, and I think that's perhaps where things are going.
Just before we move on to focus very specifically on Kemi and Robert, James Cleverly, do we look at his campaign and see that it went wrong in some sense? Or is this just, you've got a group of 120 or 121 Conservative MPs at the moment who we all know love nothing more than moments like this. They live for this stuff, the debates, the hacking, the working, the tea rooms and all the rest of it. That ultimately, once again, they pulled the wool over journalists' eyes, told us what we wanted to hear, told us what we thought was going to happen, and we've got caught out again covering a Conservative leadership contest when previous experience should have taught us these are entirely opaque and we always get it wrong.
I would have said before today that Cleverly had played the perfect campaign. He was the first to declare, had a very slick operation team, played the underdog and turned it around at the last minute. Yeah. You almost want momentum right at the end so that you're in the media attention, you've got everyone's eyeballs on you. So this is just truly a shock result. But let's remember, as you say, 121 MPs. That is a tiny electorate.
Well, you would say that. You would say that, Serena. Do you know what? Why don't we just take a breather for a moment, try and get our thoughts together as we come to terms with the fact that, shock of shocks, James Cleverly is out of the leadership race to be the next Conservative Party leader. When we come back, we will be looking in some significant depth at the campaigns of both Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick. Welcome back to The Daily, still in our Westminster studio, still with us, political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh. And look, we know, two candidates going to the membership. Let's deal with the practical stuff first. When are we going to find out who the next Conservative leader is? Come on.
If you can believe it, in a month's time.
What?
Remember, this started in July as well, so we're quite far through.
Sake.
So now goes to the membership. I've been told they've been printing the ballots tomorrow. They'll be sending them out on Friday, and people may see them arrive by Saturday, and then they can vote by post or electronically. But that whole process takes a month, and we will hear in November.
And when we talk about the Conservative membership, can we generalise? Because we have two candidates from the right, and we'll talk about some of perhaps the differences between the two of them in just a second. And of course, when you think of the Conservative, membership, they are certainly of the right, but it's where of the right we would describe them.
So there are about 100,000 members. They'll also be a bit different to the parliamentary party as well.
100%, yeah.
Because whilst the Tories lost a lot of red wall seats, people may not have reneged on their membership, so they still may be voting. So you might still have those 2019 Boris Johnson voters who can vote in the leadership but are not necessarily represented by their MP. So there historically has been this split. I mean, last time I covered the Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak custings, and there was a big divide between the red wallers and the sort of southern heartland Tory voters, what you call it, those traditional voters that you imagine. And there's usually a conflict between the two. But the two candidates this time have largely run on the same platform, on the same pitch. So I think we'll have to see in this campaign where they start to split, where they start to cleave, because they might have to now show their real differences because James Cleverly's out the race.
And certainly the respective teams will be trying to flag up those differences, particularly when they can be viewed in a negative light. And I suppose when it comes to Robert Jenrick, he's had something of a Damascene conversion, hasn't he, to the position that he now finds himself on the right of parts of the right of the Conservative Party. Everyone always used to think of him as one nation, that shorthand for the centre ground of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I think that's because he was in Cameron's government, for example. But I think he's just had a longer political life, so people can look back on those comments. And I think there was some unease that perhaps people didn't really believe that he'd had this conversion, and they don't really know where to place him, where Kemi is much newer. She has always been quite a firebrand, very open with her opinions.
The party love her every time she stands up to talk. Every time I've heard her addressing Conservative members, they really warm to her.
But then also think about Robert Jenrick's edge, which is he looks like your typical Conservative politician, and there's something to be said for that with the members. That goes down very well.
I mean, let's be specific. I mean, talking ethnicity, we're talking gender.
Both of those. But he went to the same kind of establishments as what you would have assumed. He wears a suit and tie. If you were to draw a Conservative politician, it wouldn't look wildly different to that, only in terms of historically how they've been presented before. But then Kemi Badenoch can use that to an advantage, and she is very authentic. That's how people respond to her.
But she does put her foot in it quite a lot. She did it at the party conference. Those comments about maternity pay, which she continues to insist were taken out of context. And I'm not sure that's a particularly handy characteristic to have if you're seeking to become the next Prime Minister.
People really like that she says what she thinks, and that is her whole image. But I think there is also a worry that you're right, she can be misinterpreted, and then she also double down on these kind of things.
Let's think about the other side of the Commons, the government benches. I mean, if you were Sir Keir Starmer, who would you prefer to be sitting opposite you come Wednesday, 11:59 before PMQs?
I think they'll be looking at this result very happy. Their whole pitch to the voters is that we are not the Conservatives because the Conservatives are chaotic. Their chaos and division was the line that they used over and over and over again. And I think, as we were talking about before, Kemi being this live wire feeds into that. So it's not that they worry that James Cleverly wouldn't give them an easy ride or a harder ride necessarily in terms of the politician. But Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick fit this idea that the Conservatives are chaotic. And if they are both in the same camp fighting in the very vicious campaign over this next month, that will just feed into the narrative that Labour really want.
The role of party leader, particularly after a general election defeat, is twofold. One, you've got to convince your people that you can win the next election. And two, and I would suggest actually, given where we are in the parliamentary term, first year, even more importantly, they need to unite the party with two candidates from the right and a campaign that I am promising you right now, you might disagree, but I'm promising you right now, this is going to get horrible. It's going to get dirty. I can't see either of them uniting the Conservatives, not immediately anyway.
That is an interesting point. I agree with that in the sense that Labour have been in government 6 weeks and they effectively don't have an opposition. They have a leader today who turned up at PMQs once a week, but you never see him. He doesn't vote. He doesn't make a speech at Conservative conference. So they really have no one in the chamber holding them to account as the second biggest party opposition, right? The longer this Conservative leadership goes on and the more chaos that it ensues just adds to that fact. I think James Cleverly's, one of his pitches was that he can step into the role straight away, where the others might take a bit of time, as you say, to professionalise, to build a team around them, to understand where they want the party to go. And in that time, Labour can effectively continue this time of not having a real opposition.
So they won't have the leader in place for the time of the autumn statement budget. I'm trying to think about that. I think Rishi Sunak will still be in place then on this timetable. And
that's true.
That seems a strategic error, if I might put it mildly.
There was a lot of criticism when they first just told us the calendar for this leadership race, and they wanted an extended period. And there was a lot of criticism over that. So you've got Keir Starmer's first 100 days in office this weekend. There's effectively no opposition for that. Yep. As you say, the budget, there's no opposition for that.
Although Rishi Sunak does know a thing or two about, budget statements. So perhaps that was the calculation.
Perhaps. But essentially, there is a power vacuum in the chamber at the moment.
I mean, we were sitting in the studio watching the results as they came in, 25 minutes ago. I genuinely didn't see it coming. Was there a bit of you that thought this was a possible outcome?
I mean, anything is a possible outcome. Obviously, we are always thinking anything can happen. And I think with this race specifically, no one really wants to make an assumption. But really, we thought Cleverly was safe. Robert Jenrick this morning was saying that openly on the airwaves, saying it's between himself and Kemi Badenoch. There was an assumption that perhaps the membership would get to decide between two different wings of the party. There was all of this. But it really shows that maybe we don't really know what's going on.
And on that bombshell, Serena, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. And that is your lot for this edition of the Sky News Daily. Look, by the time you are listening to this, there will be plenty of analysis on the website, skynews.com. So if you want to delve a little bit more deeply than even Serena and I have done, that's where you should head. We'll see you again tomorrow.